Chase at the 40. Look at that move. Look at Chase go. Oh, my goodness. What a gear.
He comes down to this in his car end zone. Intercepted.
McPherson. And Cincinnati is heading to the Super Bowl.
Toss here. Nixon's going to throw. Open man. Caught. Higgins. Touchdown.
Drives. Touchdown. Joe Burrow has his first rushing touchdown of the season.
Hooday, Bengal fans. He is Mon. I am Jake. This is the Bengals Pulse, the heartbeat of our Cincinnati Bengals. Special edition Bengals Pulse, Mon. I am so stoked about this show. Our guest today is a legend, and I am so excited to talk Bengals football with him. But before we do, Mon, how's your week been, bud?
Good. It's been really good. It's been raining. It's super hot in Florida, and it is what it is. Just got to survive this summer and get ready for football season. And let's get on with this great show. Let's do it.
Well, listen. 2 shows in 1 week. It's like the regular season all over again. I love this, Mon. I get to see your face a couple times a week. It's weird being up here in Northern Kentucky now. Yeah, the stash is just amazing, dude. I mean, it is amazing. It looks great. It looks great on camera.
All right.
You look legit. Well, let's get to our guest today, Mon. Again, if you are a Bengals fan, you will know our guest today. His list of accomplishments and everything that he's involved in is incredible. He's a host of Jungle Roar Bengal podcast. He is a member of CLNS Media Group. He is a member of the Pro Football Writers of America. Again, if you are a Bengals fan, you are going to know him, and you probably love him. We are so excited to have Mike Trags Petraglia.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Mike,
gentlemen,
welcome.
That is some sort of buildup and great expectations. I have to meet those great expectations, and certainly will try to on this podcast that I'm very, very honored to be appearing on today. Thank you.
Thanks, man. It means a lot. It means a lot to have you on, Trags, and let's get right to it because Mon and I are so stoked to have you on our show. We are both big fans of all the work that you do. So let's get right to this thing and let's talk Bengals.
Trags, listen, before we start talking about the Bengals, let me ask you a couple questions. You covered the Boston sports scene for years. Yes. Tell us about your early days. What drove you to become a sports journalist? And do you have an all-time favorite sporting event that you covered? And what brought you back to Cincinnati?
Okay, let's last question first. Okay. Pandemic 2020. Had decided that it was time to come back to Cincinnati. I had one daughter at Miami University in Oxford, Janie, my older daughter, and my younger daughter was a senior at Lincoln Sudbury back in Boston, and she was looking at UC, Xavier, and Dayton. She wound up choosing Dayton, so I figured, when she was a senior in high school, now would be as good a time as any to move back to Cincinnati. Covering the Bengals after covering the Patriots for 27 years had always been a career goal and ambition, if you will, of mine. So that's what brought me back to Cincinnati. In terms of the greatest sporting event I ever covered or one of the most memorable, I guess I would have to say Super Bowl 51, 28-3 down, late third quarter in Houston when the Patriots seemed like for all the world they were beaten by Matt Ryan and the Atlanta Falcons. And I sort of remind Kelsey Conway of the Cincinnati Enquirer of this because she was covering the Atlanta Falcons at the time. But I thought that game was over. And then Dante Hightower made a strip sack and kind of turned the game on its ear. That would have to be the most surreal event I ever covered. Now, I covered game 4 of the 2004 ALCS, the Dave Roberts steal of second base, and the Red Sox come from 3-0 down. That would certainly be on the list. A couple of hockey Stanley Cup finals, the 2019 Game 7 against the St. Louis Blues, the Bruins and Blues. Blues come out of nowhere, win that Stanley Cup 4-3. That sticks out to me. And I would have to say, as a kid growing up in Kenwood, went to Indian Hill High School. Back then, even though I was a 76er fan, I was always a great admirer of the Lakers-Celtics rivalry. And I graduated high school the day of Game 7 between the Lakers and Celtics in '84. That was a game the Celtics came back and won that title. And I had the privilege of covering Game 7 in 2010 when the Lakers came from behind in the fourth quarter and beat the Celtics. That's still, to me, one of the great games I ever covered, one of the great events I ever covered when I was in Boston. And then I would say, I don't know if you guys remember the David Gordon field goal, the Boston College field goal against Notre Dame when Notre Dame was #1 in the country back in 1993. That's one of the first big sporting events I ever covered. And that was a long, long time ago. That was my first year in Boston.
Very cool.
That's a long answer to a short question, as Bill Belichick loves to say.
Well, Trags, I'm a Sixers fan also. I just want you to know that. So I like you even more now.
I'm a little frustrated, dejected. We haven't even been, we haven't even been to the Eastern Conference Finals, let alone the NBA Finals.
That's crazy.
I know.
And that's crazy.
I don't know how you feel about this, but I think the process is a bit of a fraud. Now, I'm not talking about Joel Embiid. He's not a fraud. But the whole idea of tanking all those years, what has it gotten you? Really hasn't gotten you much.
I think Tobias Harris, Jimmy Butler, they had a decision to make, and I think they
made the wrong one. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a great way of really boiling it all down, Mon. That's why you do such a great job on this podcast, because you're able to succinctly boil it all down to essentially one decision. And if they had that decision to do over again, and they had Jimmy Butler against the Celtics this year, the Sixers win that series in 6 games.
I know. And thank you. I have a headache. Thank you very much.
Oh, well.
Listen, first of all, I saw your eyes light up, Mon, when you started talking about the 76. I mean, you should have seen his face, Trags. He was like a kid in the game store.
So, long time, not to go down the rabbit hole here. Your favorite 76er of all time is? Because mine will shock you.
Well, it's going to be Dr. J, because I was raised in West Virginia, 80s. You know, of course, you're enamored by him. Daryl Dawkins, I loved. And, so them, Mo Cheeks also. So
mine would be, and I wore this number in high school, 22, Andrew Toney, the Boston Strangler. To me, the best, a pure shooter, never said boo when he was on the court. He was quiet. He was an assassin, loved him under pressure. He was my favorite 76er, Andrew Toney.
He was awesome. He really was. That was a hell of a team, too. They won a championship with him. So
yeah, in 1983, that was the last championship they won. 40 years ago, Mon. 40. 4-0.
Jake, just like that, Jake, we became a Sixers podcast, just like that.
I know. I'm
sure did. Liberty Ballers. Liberty Ballers is a great podcast, by the way, Mon, if you want to look that up.
All I can say is this, Trags. You and I were doing great. I love having you on until you started giving Mom props. And now, Trags, let me tell you, I am never going to hear the end of that. Did you hear what Trags said? He said I was good. Trags, you just made my life a living hell. I still love you, Trags, but you just made my life a living hell. Listen, hey, real quick, Trags. How did you get? I mean, how did you start in the business of sports journalism? Because I know. I went to school to be a sports broadcaster. It's a hard gig to get into.
It is.
How did you get involved initially in that?
1988, went up to Northern New York, covered St. Lawrence and Clarkson college hockey, covered Syracuse University basketball and football for about 4 years, and made the decision after I had graduated Villanova University with an electrical engineering degree, by the way, and a minor in communications, that I wanted to follow my passion, which was sports and sports broadcasting. Now, I started out wanting to really be a play-by-play announcer, a radio announcer, not necessarily on the writing side. So I went up to Northern New York, got on-air experience, and then after 4 years there, I went and spent a year in Canton, Ohio, WHBC, covering Bill Belichick and the Cleveland Browns, as well as the Cleveland Cavaliers. Lenny Wilkins. That was a great experience. Those Mark Price, Brad Doherty teams, those are really, really great teams, and obviously lost to Jordan. But anyway, everybody did. So I spent a year in Canton, Ohio, and then after a year in Canton, Ohio, I decided it was time to spread my wings and get to a big market and really spend 24/7 covering sports. And that's why I had family up in Boston. Actually, I had my sister who lived in Boston. So I moved up to Boston to be close to her, cover Boston teams. And 27 years later, I wound up covering the Patriots, Red Sox, Bruins, and Celtics, obviously, and Boston College. And look, there wasn't a lot of money in it. Still isn't a lot of money, except for the upper tiers of the industry. I think we all know that. But I was committed, and it was my passion in my career and my calling to cover sports and really want to do it 24/7. And if you have that pursuit and that ambition, then you should pursue it. And that's kind of the way my career unfolded.
Well, we are glad to have you back home, Trags, where you belong, back home.
Yeah, I do feel, I will tell you that having come back here in October 2020 and started covering the Bengals in April of 2021, it's different. It does feel like coming home. And you know that expression, you can't go home again. Yes, you can, if it's where your heart is. And I obviously, as I said, I grew up in Kenwood, went to Indian Hill, and grew up with those 70s Reds, the Big Red Machine, the 70s Bengals, which the 75 Bengals is, to me, still one of the great Bengal teams of all time that people don't talk enough about. And I think we're seeing the recognition now of that team that wasn't even considered 15, 20, 30 years ago. And I think now with the induction of obviously Ken Riley into the Hall of Fame this year, I think that kind of accelerates the recognition of those teams. And obviously the 80s Bengals were terrific, made it to 2 Super Bowls. And then we don't want to talk about the 20 years between that.
Yeah, let's not talk about
experience now.
Talk about that. Well, I was going to say, you came home at the right time, right? I mean,
I did.
Right now, and now our Reds are just a dynamic young team, just like our Bengals. And Ma and I were talking about this earlier this week. It's just incredible. Him and I have been Bengals and Reds fans for over 40 years, and I don't know if I've ever seen this kind of a buildup where both teams are this electric and young and exciting. It's just crazy. It's awesome.
Well, there are two years that come to mind. 1990, when obviously the Reds went wire to wire, and the Bengals won obviously the AFC Central at that time.
Right.
And they beat up on the Houston Oilers in the first round, and then, Bo Jackson, the curse of Bo began the next week against Kevin Walker.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. And, that didn't end until 32 years later. But anyway, I would say the 1990 year was one that Cincinnati fans will never forget. And then there was 2012. The Bengals were certainly competitive. They were a wild card team. And the Reds had big dreams. After they went up 2-0 against the Giants, I'm thinking, here we go. This team is for real.
I have no idea how we lost that series. I have no idea.
I was a Great American working for MLB Network at the time, network radio. And I was in the clubhouse, and I was on the field actually waiting for the Reds to clinch game 3 in extra innings. We all remember how that, series, how the downfall began. And oh boy, that was a tough one. As a Cincinnati native, being in the ballpark for those 3 games was ugly. Ugly. And that's the last time, really.
Yeah, I think I remember that game. Brandon Phillips had a base running snafu, got thrown out of third.
Yeah. First inning. I sure do. I was going to say that.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And the 75 Bengals, I'm just fascinated by that team.
We talk about them on the show, Trags. We talk about them all the time on the show.
I'm fascinated by that team.
Yeah, I grew up in the 80s and, the 81 team and the 88 team. I mean, two of, and I grew up in Florida, but, watching the Bengals and being a Bengals fan in Florida, the Freezer Bowl was the first game I ever watched. I was 5 years old and just absolutely fell in love. My mom said because of the striped helmets, but who knows why. But let's talk about because I think we all our hearts are all breaking now that we've relived all this.
I know this is supposed to be an uplifting podcast, podcast about what we have to look forward to in the summer and the fall and the winter.
Let's talk about that, Trags, because I love. OTAs, being a football coach myself, it's pajama practice. We got shorts, we got T-shirts, a run. But I want to know from somebody as dialed in as you, what takeaways, if any, did you have from the OTAs this year? I know they're going light this year as well, but any takeaways, anything that looked different for you?
Well, I wrote about this last week, and I've got to refresh my memory about I'll focus on just the mini camp, the 3 days where it was most structured. Okay. And I certainly would say that right tackle is going to be a position to keep your eye on. And I do think Jackson Carman has come to Bengals offseason this year more committed to making an impact and more committed to being a true professional than he has in his previous 2 seasons. That stuck out to me. And the fact that Jonah Williams did show up, he was frustrated with what happened. He aired it out, and I think the team was allowing him to do that. And it's going to be Jackson Carman and Jonah Williams. And if Jonah Williams is healthy, he will be your starting right tackle. It'll be interesting to see how the Bengals get their running game going. And that was the other thing that stuck out to me. Joe Mixon is going to be on this team. And I don't know at what price tag that's going to be, if that's been worked out and the news hasn't broken yet. But I think Joe Mixon is your starting running back. And what's going to be interesting to me is Travion Williams, who's getting the Samaje Perine reps as the third down back, or the second change of pace back, if you will, behind Joe Mixon. I have always loved the way Travion Williams runs. He runs low to the ground. I think he's an adequate blocker, certainly, and he can catch the ball. And those are all the things you want in this Brian Callahan, Zach Taylor offense. You want running backs that can do that. There's certainly been, rumors out there about Zeke, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys. Would he fit in here? And recently the Minnesota Vikings running back, help me out. Just got released. Thank you. Dalvin Cook. He is an interesting possibility, but I don't think the Bengals are going that route. I mean, unless, something breaks and they've hidden their cards, which they are very good at doing. I don't think that's the route they're going to go. I do think another takeaway from minicamp will be the emergence of Charlie Jones. I think they drafted him to make an impact. And whether it's in punt returns, he and Trent Taylor were certainly getting the majority of reps. Charlie Jones was somebody that stuck out. He also got a lot of first team reps with the offense early on in the first 2 days of minicamp. I started to work more through Trevor Siemian and the second team as practices moved along. But certainly he is somebody that I think the Bengals are going to look to implement into the offense. The tight end position, don't undersell the value of Irv Smith Jr. He is somebody else that stuck out to me in minicamp. He was looking very comfortable. He was making athletic catches over the middle of the field. He made a nice catch, and I talked to him on my Jungle Roar podcast last week at the end of minicamp about that catch that he made over Jordan Battle in the back corner of the end zone. That is the kind of play that the Bengals are going to look for him to make when he gets, matched up on a safety in real life, low red zone and even higher red zone opportunities. That's why they got him. And, he's going to get opportunities in this Bengals offense that I don't think he enjoyed in Minnesota. Injury, obviously, being part of that. But, he missed a whole season in 2020, I believe it was, or 2021. I can't remember now. But he missed a whole season with meniscus tears. So, he's somebody certainly to keep an eye on. Then there's the rookies on defense. I think that Miles Murphy is going to get a lot of special team work under Darren Simmons, but he's also going to get a lot of reps with Joseph Osai in terms of backing up the edges, Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard. He's going to get a lot of work. Jordan Battle is going to get a lot of work. I think he's going to work his way in more than you might see an ordinary rookie safety get work in a guy like Lou Anarumo's defense. And why is that? Because Nick Saban threw a lot at his defensive players at Alabama. And Jordan Battle is a smart kid. And I think that one of the reasons that he was so attractive to the Bengals, even though some of his athletic grades were not as high as other defensive prospects in this year's draft, he's a smart guy who catches on fast. And I think that means a lot to Lou Anarumo, who is hesitant, as he mentioned last year after that Dolphins game on Thursday night. He is very hesitant to throw a lot on a rookie's plate, and he's certainly hesitant to start any rookies, which is why Dax Hill was really slowed into
that's a good way to say it. That's a good way.
He was eased is an even better way to say it.
I like it. Eased.
Yes. He was eased into the rotation in the secondary of the Bengals, and that's probably because they had some veterans already there, but they didn't want to throw too much on Dax Hill's plate at once. Same could be true with Jordan Battle, but we'll wait and see. Nick Scott's going to be, if he's healthy, I think he's going to fit right into what Lou Anarumo wants to do. Dax Hill, with a year under his belt, he's going to fill the role of Jesse Bates. So those are some of the takeaways I had. I thought, and then there's the punting competition. We have to mention that. I do think that Brad Robbins is going to win the job. He looked, just from the naked eye, and, I was able to watch all 3 minicamp practices. He was getting off booming punts.
That's what we've heard. They
were significantly higher and deeper and more accurate than Drew Chrisman. Does that mean the Bengals are not going to keep Drew Chrisman around? No, they'll keep him around on the practice squad like they did when they had Kevin Huber. I don't think that is going to change. They love Drew Chrisman in terms of his attitude, and having a guy who knows how to punt in your system on your special teams unit is of value. And I don't think any team is going to necessarily steal Drew Chrisman away from you. It could happen if a team needs a punter, but it's unlikely. So, I think Brad Robbins is probably – you don't usually draft a punter in the 5th round and not expect him to make
if he's not going to make the team. Right.
Very true.
Correct.
Very true.
And so, and I think that would be the final takeaway that I had from minicamp.
I love what you said about Jordan Battle. He was my favorite pick of the entire draft. But I think this draft class this year, and of course the Bengals have done well the last couple of years, but this draft class this year to me was a home run. I think from top
we'll wait
to
and
bottom,
see,
Yeah, I think from top to bottom, the potential of this draft class is going to be dynamic.
I said, by the way, I'm going to correct myself here. I said 5th round here. I meant 6th round.
6th round.
You don't draft a punter in the 6th round without the expectation that he's going to eventually win the job.
Yeah.
Right.
Trags, the Bengals have obviously assembled a great roster. They've gone to 2 straight AFC Championship games, went to the Super Bowl. I just don't feel like intangibles are talked about enough. They have a solid locker room, that unifying culture. What makes that locker room so strong? Give us your input on that.
Good guys, good players. I mean, the mix of and Zach Taylor talks about this all the time. Guys who love ball, guys who won't complain if you ask them to, spend an extra half hour to an hour and a half looking over film. You give them some extra tape, and they're like, give me as much as I can handle. I'm going to go home and I'm going to watch the film and study it and get back to you and tell you what I like and what I don't like. And that's the Bengals are filled in that locker room with those kind of guys. Yes, you want guys who like each other and get along with each other, But what Zach Taylor has really done a great job of, and Duke Tobin as well, is filling that locker room with guys completely committed to the winning process. And, we joked about the process with the Sixers and whatnot and how that hasn't paid off for them. But in the NFL, there is a process. And the process is studying game film, understanding your system and what's expected of you in your particular role, and then perfecting it. And I think Zach Taylor has assembled a cast of characters. Well, actually, it's Duke Tobin who's assembled the cast of characters. And Zach Taylor has conveyed through his leadership and his assistant coaches that message of what is expected. And it's just been this symbiotic relationship between the front office, the coaching staff, and the players that has gelled very well. And certainly when you have guys like DJ Reader, you have guys like Sam Hubbard, Joe Burrow, of course. He is, he leads by example. He doesn't have to say a lot, but when he does talk, they all listen. And, I'm going to throw a name out, and I think some eyebrows are going to be raised simply because of the controversial nature of the player. But Joe Mixon, inside that locker room, players really do like Joe Mixon, and they feel drawn to him as a friend, as a cohort, somebody who, keeps his nose to the grindstone and really works hard. And sometimes, everybody in that locker room knows that, we're human beings, we're not perfect. And I'm not passing judgment, good, bad, or indifferent on Joe Mixon, what's happened off the field. But he is well liked and well respected in that locker room. It takes a certain type of locker room to walk that fine line. And I think the Bengals have enough good characters and enough good people in that locker room to be able to, know the difference and be able to walk that fine line. So, I know it's again another long answer to a short question, but that locker room is something that Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor have spent a lot of time, crafting and working hard to build, and they've built a great culture.
Yeah, I think it's been essential to their success. It's obviously the talent is huge.
Agreed.
You got to have those intangibles. I think some other teams that have loaded in talent, like the Cleveland Browns, for example, I think their locker room intangibles aren't up to par. And that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think too. What you said about Joe Mixon, from somebody that like Mon and I, who are not in that locker room like you are, you can tell. You can still tell. You can see it from the outside that guys they gravitate towards Joe. You can see that
they do.
Whether you see videos in the locker room or even on the practice field or even on the game, during the games, he's like a fan watching, when the defense is on the field. I mean, I think his, like you said, I mean, I know it's a little controversial, but his leadership on that team and in that locker room, I think has been essential. Even when the Bengals were struggling, he has always been the same. He's always been that same guy who has been just a great teammate, in that locker room.
I don't think there's any question about that. I will tell you, and Joe Mixon knows this, he's got to be better. There's got to be more explosive plays in the run game. Zach Taylor has mentioned that often, several times in the last two seasons. They've got to have more explosive plays in the running game. And I will tell you that I think this, certainly this is the best offensive line that the Bengals have had.
Oh, no doubt.
In decades. On paper,
no doubt.
This has the chance of being an all-timer right up there with the 88 Bengals. To me, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but that 88 Bengals team, probably the best offensive line in the team's history.
I say it all the time.
That's
my favorite team. Go ahead,
a lot of late round draft picks. Munoz was a first rounder. Montoya was a later. Bruce Reimers, Kozerski, all those
Walters,
guys, eighth.
Right.
That was a heck of a unit. You're right, and only one first rounder.
Yeah, and I just think, the way that offensive line gelled, to me, I see a lot of, and I can speak to this because I, followed that 88 team very closely and still had Cincinnati roots from my high school days. That offensive line was very intertwined. They've gotten along with each other. They loved one another. This one, I can tell you from having been in the locker room, very similar. And, that's why I think Jackson Carman has a shot, because I think a lot of that has rubbed off on Jackson Carman. And I can tell you that he came to off-season workouts this year with a much different physique. Yes, he still had a little of that excess fat, if you will. I mean, let's call it what it is. He still is not going to be mistaken for Mr. Olympia. I'm not saying that. But I got a lot of grief among some of my colleagues on the Bengals beat for using the word svelte to describe Jackson Carman. He has a different body type. And when I asked him about it early on in the off-season practices, he said he did a lot of, non-traditional training. He did a lot of UFC, MMA training that got his body to respond in different ways that it hadn't responded before. He did a lot more core work. He did a lot more yoga work. And that tells me that the guy gets it. Like, he's got to get his body, or had to get his body, in a different type of shape to handle the load that is going to be expected of him. And the reason I bring all of this up is the Bengals in running situations, I think, are going to be a lot more dynamic. I think they're going to have a lot more power on the right side. Let's say that they have Jonah Williams and Jackson Carman, or they have Jonah Williams and Lael Collins in there at the same time. That's one hell of an offensive front.
Agreed.
Along with a possible tight end to put out there. And, what the Bengals have needed to do, and they haven't been able to do, is get 2 yards when they need to get 2 yards.
Yes, sir.
And
yes,
I
sir.
mean, going back to Super Bowl 56 in the final drive, you got to get that 1 yard, and they couldn't get that 1 yard. And to me, that one play on third down still, to me, sticks with me, because if they're able to get that 1 yard, there's no doubt in my mind they're marching down the field and winning that game.
We were at that game. I know.
We were both at it. We were both at it. Or at least tie in the football game. Either one of those. That game was not going to end in regulation unless the Bengals were hoisting a trophy. And we say this on this pod all the time, Trags, is if the Bengals had this offensive line the last 2 years, we're going for a three-peat this year. I mean,
I think
that's safe to say.
I would say you'd at least have one Super Bowl. You'd at least have one, and you would have been in 2 straight Super Bowls. Yeah. A lot of things can happen in Super Bowls, and we saw that with the Eagles. That, I mean, and they raced out over the Chiefs early in the last Super Bowl, and the Chiefs hung in there because they have a transcendent quarterback, if you will, and Patrick Mahomes. By the way, okay, I need to rant here. I don't want to see another social post from the Kansas City Chiefs about how they were disrespected by Jamar Chase. Now, I can tell you, and I was not in the scrum with Jamar when he was asked this, because we were running around trying to get that was the day Joe Burrow spoke, and then it was the same day that Jonah Williams spoke, and the idea that day was get Burrow, get Jonah Williams. Those are the 2 most important guys that day. Right. But I am sure that Jamar Chase was not disrespecting Patrick Mahomes, because if you've ever been around Jamar Chase, here's the way it goes down. When you ask him a question that catches him off guard, he will answer Pat who? Like literally get caught off guard. And to me, having gone back and heard that response, he was not disrespecting Patrick Mahomes by saying the words Pat who. He was caught off guard. Like, what are you talking about? Of course I think it's Joe Burrow. He's my guy. Pat who?
Yeah, of course. What's he going to say? Right, yeah.
And I think this is being teams that do this, that are that desperate for motivation. I question their inner fortitude. Now, it's ridiculous to question, I guess, about the Kansas City Chiefs, but it just seems, faux rage. It's just faux anger. Like, what are you doing?
And it's fake tough guy stuff. It's fake.
Yeah, it's fake tough guy. That's what I was gonna say. It's a perfect way to say it, Mon. And it's so funny, Trags. Before you came on, Mon and I were talking about this off air. Travis Kelce belongs in a circus. He is a clown. Yeah, I know you can't say it. I can say it. He is a clown. He is
He's a great football player, but it's
a great football. I'm not talking about his football. I'm talking about if you can put a mic, he just wants a mic in front of him. He just wants attention. And I don't have respect for that. Being a coach myself, I don't have respect when players make it about themselves.
So I will give you a comparison of a player at the same position that I covered, and Rob Gronkowski. Now, Gronk was a lot happier, and he didn't come across as acerbic. Gronk was just this, and he knew what he was doing, but he portrayed this fun, dumb, happy guy who was just loving life playing with Tom Brady. And you put a microphone in front of him, he was going to say something funny, right? He just, that was Gronk being Gronk, as we like to say in New England. Travis Kelce has much more of an edge to him. And he comes across as a guy who has been wronged. And I'm like, well, Travis, you've got 2 Super Bowl rings. You've been to 3 Super Bowls. You've won 2. You're playing with a transcendent quarterback, as I said, in Patrick Mahomes. What more do you want? Stop acting like the world owes you something. Yeah. And I think that's the way this whole Patrick Mahomes being dissed thing comes across. With Gronk, he'd say, I'm going to throw him out of the club on a Sunday night game. I don't know if you guys remember this Patriots-Colts game in Indianapolis. And he ran one of the players off the sideline on a block. And he ran.
Oh, yes. I do remember that.
Field.
Yes.
And he was, protecting Brady and whatnot. And I was going to kick him out. I'm running him out of the club. And that was Gronk saying something, and everybody laughed at it. Well, when Travis Kelce says something, you're not laughing. You're like,
you're not laughing. You're like, why?
No, you're not. Yeah. And it's just a little different. But hey, that's the personality of the NFL, and every team has their own personality. And I think this Bengal team has, to your point earlier, Mon, I think this Bengal team has a pretty good, very good personality.
Yes, I do too. I
agree. And we're talking a lot about, let's go right into this question, because I think it is something that, we do need to start talking about, because we hear a lot of comparisons, Burrow and Brady, right? We heard that these last couple years, right? Especially when we, went into Tampa, beat them last year, it was like dethroning the new GOAT, all this stuff about. And again, I'm going to say this now, Trax. I get called a homer a lot. I think Joe Burrow is the best quarterback in the league. I played quarterbacks my entire life.
Pure quarterback. I don't think there's any correct.
Pure quarterback. I'm not talking about athletically. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about the intangibles of playing the position of quarterback, the mechanics.
I know where you're going.
Okay, so I always Joe Burrow to me is the best, and I have a hard time because, again, and you were there. I mean, you covered probably the greatest dynasty that the NFL has ever seen. You were able to cover that. So I want to know from a guy that has covered both now. Yeah. What comparisons are there between Burrow and Brady? What do you see there? Because again, you're gonna have a better idea that you covered both of them. We as Bengal fans obviously are we are gonna be homers towards Burrow, but what do you see? What do you see between Burrow and Brady that are comparable?
I will give you 2 comps that immediately come to mind.
Okay.
First of all, I think Burrow and Brady can do more before the snap to command the defense and get the defense to do what they want it to do better than anybody I've ever seen. And that's one certain similarity, is that Burrow and Brady both have the ability to beat you with their mind. And that's because both of them work incredibly hard studying the game. And, we see that Joe Burrow doesn't go out and party a lot. He's not extravagant in the way he carries himself off the field. And he's a lot like Tom Brady in that regard. That's because he is, like Zach Taylor is fond of saying, he is a football guy. He loves ball. And that is the one comparison that comes to mind. Both can do things pre-snap and, do this whole thing. Both of them are, Peyton did the same thing. But
cerebral, just incredibly cerebral quarterbacks, right?
And obviously, this is the whole check with me thing when they go to their helmet, check with me.
Right,
And
right.
Burrow and Brady do a lot of that pre-snap. So that's the first similarity. Second similarity that immediately comes to mind, the game is never too big. They never allow any moment in the game to be too big, and they never get overwhelmed. It's why Tom Brady was able to engineer a comeback from 28-3 down and have more comebacks in NFL history than any quarterback who has ever played the game, and certainly more playoff comebacks than anybody who has ever played in the history of the game. And to me, that's what makes Brady Brady, is those great moments late in high-pressured games that no one else could handle himself the way Brady does. And it's his way of slowing his heart rate, slowing the game down, not letting things get too big. And I see it from Joe Burrow. I mean, how many times in the last 2 years have we said the Bengals are in big trouble? Even last year, well, first of all, the comeback, I believe, that is the greatest playoff comeback in NFL history is the Bengals beating the Chiefs in the AFC Championship 2 years ago. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it's better than 28-3. 28-3 was on a neutral field against sort of a subpar defense that was gassed. 21-3 down at Arrowhead in one of the most hostile, if not the most hostile football environment there is in the National Football League, against a Chiefs defense that was fresh and ready to go, is to me, and the fact that the Chiefs offense was, running at will and doing things at will. The Bengals were able to hang in there, take that punch. And the reason they were able to take the punch, one of the big reasons, was that touchdown drive right before the half. The Samaje P run, touchdown run.
Yeah.
And Joe Burrow, that second half had all of the earmarks of what makes a perfect Joe Burrow game. Took care of the ball, did the things, and executed when they absolutely, positively had to have the plays. And we've seen it many, many times over the last couple of years where Burrow has had to make plays late in games, and he makes them. He made them in the Kansas City game last year when the Bengals came from behind, held on, obviously thanks in part to Jermaine Pratt, but they were able to come from behind and win that game as well. They were able to erase 3 14-point deficits in the division clincher against the Chiefs at Paycor a couple of years ago in the penultimate, game of the regular season. They were able to do that, and that was because of Joe Burrow's execution. He has been able to do things and use weapons that I've really not seen in my career, because the Brady Patriots didn't have as many weapons as Joe Burrow has, at least on the perimeter. Yes, Brady had Gronk. I'll give you that. Right. And he had Randy Moss and Wes Welker for a couple of years. Those were obviously historical seasons. Yeah. But what Joe Burrow has to work with and how he knows how to use his weapons is something else that also I think draws similarities with Tom Brady.
And I think, too, the one thing Joe Burrow didn't have was an offensive line. And we talked about this. We talked about this last week on this show, is that, I think it gets overlooked. And I'm not trying to badmouth our O-line the last 2 years, but the difference between Joe Burrow and the rest of the cast of quarterbacks in the NFL is what Joe Burrow, yes, he's got weapons, but it's all about those front five guys. And what Joe Burrow has accomplished behind subpar offensive lines is absolutely incredible.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you something that might catch you guys off guard, but what Joe Burrow has to be careful of going forward this year is not having a false sense of security that this offensive line is going to give me more time to throw, and he holds on to the ball too long. Because
I agree.
He has got to be careful in sense, having a false sense of security is essentially what I'm saying.
I agree.
And one thing that has helped, there's an expression, and this, Coach, that a quarterback can be his own, one of his own best offensive lineman. And that's what Brady was. So many times that was said about Tom Brady. He knew how to move in the pocket, step up at the right time, slide. He did all of that. Burrow is even definitely more of an athlete than Tom Brady was, and he can do it even better than Tom Brady did. That's a third comparison, if you want to really get down to it, is the way Burrow moves around in the pocket. But that being said, he's got to be careful not to think, okay, I've got a better offensive line. I'm going to have more time to throw, hold on to the ball, and either take, costly sacks or throw interceptions. The one pass that I think all three of us can agree that Burrow would like to have back from the most recent AFC title game was the throw down the right side to T. Higgins.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's the one pass where he can't make that mistake again. And he knows that. He absolutely knows that. He was hurried in that game. He got, I believe, a hand in his face, and he wasn't able to follow through completely. But, those are the kind of things that, a guy like Joe Burrow knows. He's got areas to improve, and he's going to do that because Burrow, like Brady, is an incredibly intense competitor.
Yeah. Trags, going off that comparison real quick of Tom Brady and Joe Burrow, you had the privilege of coaching Bill Belichick, obviously. Do you see any comparisons with this current Bengal team, the way they're coached, to the way the Patriots were coached maybe early on in their dynasty? Do you see any comparisons?
Not as much. And I love Bill Belichick, and I really love the way Zach Taylor is handling his team. They are two uniquely different styles because – at least on the outside, because I don't know what happens in these meetings, but I have a pretty good sense of what happens, just the way these assistant coaches and coordinators project to us in the media. Bill Belichick was in complete control of everything that happened inside the walls of Gillette Stadium. And how did I know that? Not by what was being said, by what was not being said and who was not allowed to talk. And I guess the guy that talked the most in the end was Josh McDaniels. He would give you quite a bit. But the other coordinators were much more tight-lipped. Bill was obviously very tight-lipped. And that was just a style. And I've talked to a lot of guys like Teddy Karras and others who said, that's just the way Bill conducted his business. There was an expectation to keep things inside the walls, make your words your own and not the words of the team, which was a favorite Bill Belichick expression and mantra. Whereas with Zach Taylor kind of, I would say, empowers his assistant coaches. He empowers his coordinators. He empowers the leaders to speak in the locker room. He wants them to project a confidence, a certain air about the Bengals. And I think it's just style. Belichick and Zach Taylor have very different styles. If you ask me, the number one similarity between Belichick and Taylor, it's probably born in the leadership of their best players. They try to, let their best players be their best players. And I think Belichick, was very good in allowing his best players to do that. But I will also tell you that there was a defense, the Patriots 1.0, the first version of their dynasty was driven by the defense, not Tom Brady. And I think anybody who followed that team closely knows that. And it was the defensive leaders who spoke most frequently, the Teddy Bruschies, the Rodney Harrisons, the Ty Laws, Vince Wilfork, all of those guys. They were the dominant personality of the New England Patriots. The dominant personality of the Bengals is split pretty evenly, I'd say, but it's still more defense, I think. Just based on the guys on the defense who speak up for what they're doing and what they're able to accomplish. Certainly, Joe, the quarterback's always going to be a dominant personality, but I think you hear more of the defense from the Bengals projecting its personality than you do of the offense, believe it or not.
Yeah, interesting. Let me ask you another question real quick. Arguably, the Bengals play in the toughest division of football, the AFC North.
Yep.
Have the Ravens, Browns, and Steelers, have they done enough this offseason to dethrone the Bengals?
That's a really tough question. I would say no. The Bengals have the best roster, one of the three best rosters in football, and the Ravens have not taken a step to pass the Bengals. I don't know, where if some of these people picking the Ravens to beat the Bengals in the division are just doing it to be different, doing it to capture a couple of clicks, whatever. I don't know. But when I take a look comparatively, and I don't have the rosters of those three teams right in front of me, but with the Steelers, you have Kenny Pickett. He was good as a rookie, not great, good. And I think certainly he is their future there in Pittsburgh. Deshaun Watson is the great unknown. And I will tell you, I'm leaning towards he'll be mediocre to good, not good to great in Cleveland. He will have good games, but I don't think he is the dominant leader that I think they're paying him to be. I just don't think that that's the case at all. And with the Ravens, it's will their reworked offense, beyond OBJ and beyond the contract signing of Lamar Jackson, will they do enough and have enough to dethrone the Bengals? The Ravens certainly know the Bengals the best in the division to me and have the type of defense to be able to give the Bengals fits. Look, we know if it wasn't for the greatest fumble return in NFL playoff history, that game could very well have turned out a different way, the wild card game at Paycor Stadium. But I think, again, if the Bengals are at full strength and the Ravens are at full strength, I like the Bengals' chances a lot.
Agreed, Trax. Agreed. Let me ask you something real quick, too. I know we're running out of time here, but I got to ask you this because the biggest thing, the biggest story this offseason has been contract talks, right? And that's not always a bad thing, right? That's a good thing when you're a Super Bowl roster. Business. Right, it's the business, right? So let me just ask you, since you are dialed in, where are we in all this? What can we be expecting? Because obviously we've heard rumors coming from all over the place, and we all know one thing: Joe Burrow is going to be a Bengal for a very long time. Yeah, but I'm talking about those other guys. That's, the T. Higgins, the Logan Wilson, next year, Cheeto, DJ Reader, Tyler Boyd, obviously Jamar Chase, again, he's going to be a Bengal for a long time. But what can we look at here this year and next when it comes to these contracts, and who are we going to see in stripes for a while?
Well, if you get a chance to read Paul Dehner Jr.'s story in The Athletic on, the three biggest things to look for in the Joe Burrow contract, do it. Because I remember talking to Paul, a lot of us in the media room were talking about this one day during the offseason practices. And it's going to come down to really two determining factors: the length of the contract and the bonus money. How much money is Joe Burrow guaranteed is really what I should say. The length of the contract, the longer the length of the contract, the better for the team, and the more likely that the Bengals are going to be able to sign both T. Higgins, assuming they can get a deal done finally with David Mulligetta of Athletes First.
Yeah, right.
and sign Logan Wilson. And then move on to a guy like Jamar Chase down the road.
Right.
I would not expect Tyler Boyd to be here after this year. They just can't keep everybody. They got they drafted Charlie Jones for a reason. So I think that anticipation is there. It's kind of why you draft Dax Hill with Jesse Bates entering his final year. I think right. Without the animosity, I think, that's the same type of situation, but look for Joe Burrow's length of contract and look for the guaranteed money. I'll put it to you this way. I think the structure of the deal with Burrow is done, or mostly done. The details are not. And I think the reason for that is they're probably waiting on some Justin Herbert news, because I think the Bengals would like the details of the Justin Herbert deal in place and get a sense of what he's going to get, and then kind of go down the path of, okay, here's what we're comfortable giving him. I will tell you that Joe Burrow has made it known publicly that he wants weapons with him if he's going to sign here long term. And the Bengals are going to say, okay, we're not giving we can't afford to give you Deshaun Watson guaranteed money. We're not giving you $230 million. Cannot do it.
Which
And I think
Deshaun
that's
Watson
fair.
shouldn't have got either. Deshaun Watson.
No, he shouldn't have. And I
Right.
think what's important to understand here is I think both parties, one publicly, one privately, are going to tell you that that Deshaun Watson contract is an outlier. Look at the guaranteed money. I think it's 185 for Lamar Jackson, and look at the guaranteed money of other contracts that were just signed and the Patrick Mahomes deal. Now, I don't think Burrow is going to get 10 years. I don't think Burrow is going to give the a 10-year guaranteed deal like Mahomes did to the Chiefs. I don't think that's going to happen, but it might be 7, might be 8. I would say that's a good ballpark to look at. If it's shorter than that, I think that's Burrow saying, I want to win now, and then we can, or I want my money now, and we can reassess going down the road. But I'd be a little bit surprised, given Burrow's public comments, that he wants some weapons around him if he's going to stay here in Cincinnati, and the Bengals front office is going to say, okay, if that's the case, and we appreciate that, then you've got to work with us on some of the details of extending the contract longer years, so we can work in a guy like T. Higgins, or we can work in a guy like Logan Wilson on the defensive side of the ball. I will tell you, the Bengals love T. Higgins. They do regard him as an elite 1A type of receiver. Jamar Chase, to me, is the best talent that they have in that wide receiver room. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He's their most dynamic, explosive receiver in that room. And that's not a slight to T. Higgins at all. T. Higgins has been incredibly productive. He has shown he can go up and compete for one-on-one balls, sometimes one-on-two, and come down with it. And that's an incredibly valuable asset and skill to have. But Jamar Chase is, to me, the top receiver in that room.
Yeah.
I think.
Go ahead, Mark.
I guess us Bengal fans, we just need to get used to losing players. We lost Jesse Bates this year. We have such a good roster. We can't keep them all. There's going to be a Jesse Bates situation, a good player that we just can't afford, and that's going to be yearly. I think that
that's correct, but that's why the draft is so important, and that's why, to Coach's point, the potential of this draft class is enormous, and it's enormously important and significant to the future well-being of this window that the Bengals have propped wide open now. I mean, it is as wide open as it has ever been for this franchise. And look, guys, we've talked about potential for going on 50 years. And eventually you're going to have to bring home Vince.
Yes.
And to me, this is as good a chance as the Bengals have ever had in their 56-year history of doing that. And I think the focus you have heard and the messaging you have heard has been essentially that. We know what's at stake this season. We know that, the window's going to be open, like Joe Burrow, famously said, as long as I'm here, the window's open, which is, by the way, a great message to send to the rest of the team. That's what their quarterback feels. That is a tremendously positive message, because there'll be naysayers who say the Bengals better win now because they're going to lose everybody. Well, no, the Patriots, how many times was it said about the Patriots? One thing they did better than anybody else in the league was manage the roster. And this is where Bill Belichick does not get enough credit. He identified the 2 or 3 very best players he had to hold on to, help them. Obviously, one of them was Brady, held on to him, and rebuilt the roster around the rest of them. And that was with, smart free agent signings, which the Bengals certainly have been able to do, and through drafting very wisely and coming up big with great draft picks. And Belichick, over the years, if you take a look at some of his, especially draft picks on the offensive side of the ball, he does remarkably well. Now, you also ask those same fans in New England, why can't we draft a freaking wide receiver? And the Bengals are the opposite end of that. The Bengals have done as well drafting wide receivers as in the last 40 years as any team.
I was going to say in the last since they've been an actual organization. I mean, from the beginning,
Charlie Joyner, Charlie Joyner
Hall
through
of Famer,
Isaac
Hall
Curtis.
of Famer.
Isaac Curtis. Right. I mean, all the way
Chip
through.
Myers, all those guys.
Listen, even when the Bengals, even in those, let's not talk about the 90s, but even in the 90s, Carl Pickens was one of the best receivers in the NFL. He was one of the best receivers in the NFL during that time frame.
There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And as we said, the name I just brought up is a name that people don't talk about a lot in Bengal history. Darnay Scott, for 2 to 3 years with Jeff Blake, was off the hook. He was amazing.
Oh, he was so good.
He was explosive.
Yes.
But, the Bengals have always done a great job drafting wide receivers. And I think it was, I'll tell you exactly the day, and I shouldn't bring this up. It was the day that Joe Burrow hurt his knee in Washington. But the pregame show, I know, just hear me out. The pregame
Jamar Chase was the outcome of that. Jamar Chase was the outcome.
Dan Horde did an interview with Mike Brown in that pregame. And it was about why are the Bengals so good drafting wide receivers? And it's one of the more insightful interviews I think Mike has ever done. And Dan Horde is, one of my very favorite people.
Oh, we love him.
Planet Earth. I mean, he's brilliant. He's so good. But if you get a chance, if you can find that interview someplace, it really goes to why Mike Brown has always valued wide receivers. And it's fascinating football take, actually.
Well, I love it when he has them on before the season starts, that mock turtle soup luncheon. He always has them on his podcast, for about 30 minutes. Mike Brown is a fascinating guy. He has so much knowledge and so much history. I love listening to those interviews. But
we had Dan. We had Dan on the show, Trags, and Almond and I kept asking him. It was like, you just got to tell us stories about Mike Brown and your conversations.
Make it a monthly segment.
We said we want you on the show monthly, Dan, so you could just tell us what Mike Brown is. Real quick before we get out, I know we got to get out here, Mom. I just want to say this real quick about what Trax was saying about Joe Burrow and the contract situation. I think you said it best, Trags, is Joe Burrow. He is a football guy. He is one of the most as a coach, when I watch from the outside, I see one of the great competitors in professional sports when I see Joe Burrow. And I think for Joe Burrow, I don't want to speak for Joe Burrow, but I think if it comes down to winning Super Bowls, Joe Burrow is going to take winning Super Bowls. And he knows that he's got to have at least a supporting cast around him. And I just think I agree with you. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how all that works out, because I think Joe Burrow, we talk about Jamar Chase. I think that Joe Burrow, T. Higgins relationship and connection is very special. And I think that doesn't get talked about enough.
I agree. And I think that's why, not only is that relationship very special and very productive for the Bengals love T. Higgins. They love what his family is about, and some of the trials and tribulations that T has been through in his own life in Tennessee. He brings a lot of intangibles to the table that are still waters run deep with T. Higgins. Just remember that. Still waters run very, very deep, but the guy is committed to football. He's been very productive with Cincinnati, and the Bengals, as you both well know, and every fan watching this knows, the Bengals love to take care of their own when they can. And if you're productive, they would rather have a guy who's very productive, who knows how to play in their system and in their culture, than take somebody outside of the culture who's maybe has statistically more numbers, better numbers, and plug them in and keep your fingers crossed that he won't be a disruptor.
Right.
Hey, Trags, in closing real quick, thank you so much. Last question. We appreciate you so much. What a great show. You've we've had Hobson on, we've had Horde on. You're up there. Thank you so much. We appreciate
that. Those are high words of praise indeed.
No, thank you so much. Listen, real quick, regular season prediction. What do you think the Bengals are going to be this year, record-wise?
I think they're. I'm going to go 14-3, and I'll tell you why.
Yes,
that's what I said.
I think they.
No, I said 14-3. You said 13-4.
Right.
I think they go 14-3 because I think there's an urgency to get home field advantage, and I think that they are going to play knowing if that game last year is not in Arrowhead but at Paycor in the jungle, they win the game. I think they know that. And they also know that they want a bye week going into the playoffs to get fully healthy.
Yes.
And if you have all of the games on your turf and there are only 2 games to be played, that's a much better path to the Super Bowl than what the Bengals have been able to do. They came within 2 plays, let's say, in Kansas City of going back-to-back to the Super Bowl in a path that the Patriots never accomplished once under Tom Brady. I mean, think about what the Bengals did in 2021 was they won at home against the Raiders. Again, another big Jermaine Pratt play at the end of that game. Then they went to Tennessee and beat the number 1 seed on a last-second field goal. They went to Kansas City, erased a 21-3 deficit, and won in overtime 27-24. That path to the Super Bowl is as difficult as you're going to get. This past season, they win at home on a miraculous play against the Ravens. Then they go in the snow to a place I frankly never thought that they could win. And that was in Buffalo against Bills Mafia. They go there. They not only win, they really make a statement with their attitude and the way they went about the run game and really took apart the Bills. They won that game going away, 27-10. They go to Kansas City. They almost do it again. They almost wipe out a first half deficit, come from behind, win the game. That would have been the 2 most difficult paths, playoff paths, to a Super Bowl in NFL history. Period. End of story. No team would have ever have done that. They don't want to do that again. And that's why I think they're going to go 14-3.
Trags, do you think if Tyler Boyd was healthy that whole game, that they would have won that game last year, the AFC Championship game?
If and buts for candy and nuts. Yes. Yes, I do. I think if Tyler Boyd's healthy, he was tearing apart. I forget the slot corner's name. I really do. Forgive me for Kansas City. But he was having a good early part of that game, and Burrow was going to him, and with a great deal of success, which was clearly part of the game plan. The Bengals had picked it out in preparation for that game, right? And they had something going, and then he got hurt, and that's what happens. And again, that was more inspiration and motivation to take Charlie Jones out of Purdue. And
Trags, you talk about that path too. Let's not forget that in 21 they had to beat the Chiefs at home to win the division.
You're right.
And last year they had to play Baltimore twice and beat them twice. I agree with you 100%. I think that stuff gets overlooked. I think it's incredible what the Bengals have done these last 2 years. And I just want to say, Mon, that's Jake and 2 guests, 14-3, Mon 13-4. Trags, I agree with you. Real quick, Trags, before we get you out of here, listen, I don't really need to say this because I'm sure you have an incredible following, but where can fans find you? Where can they get your stuff? Because it is so good.
On Twitter at Trags, TRAGS. Don't let all the Reds coverage fool you. I've been on the Reds bandwagon a little bit, following them. As I said, I'm a Cincinnati native, so there's that. But all your Bengals coverage inside and outside the locker room at Trags, TRAGS on Twitter. On my YouTube channel, the Jungle Roar Podcast YouTube channel, at Jungle Roar Pod, all one word. And for all my editorial content, you can go to my CLNS Media page, clnsmedia.com, search NFL, and you'll see the Bengal material pop up.
Trags, thank you so much for coming on, man.
We really appreciate
what a pleasure. You. Listen, you got to come on again, man. We got to catch up with you. I know you got a night. Take your month off. Enjoy it. We got to catch up with you sometime during the season. If you got the time, we would love to catch up with you, man.
You know how to get a hold of me. It's my pleasure, guys. It really has been fun talking Bengals for this hour, 69 minutes now. It's been a lot of fun because, hey, I think we all have a vested interest in following Houday Nation and following the Stripes. And, as I said, there's a lot of history with the Cincinnati Bengals, and the one thing missing is that Vince Lombardi trophy. And following a team and covering a team that is pursuing that is kind of why you get into this business, right? You're a fan when you're growing up, but right now I'm not necessarily a fan, but I want to follow a team like I did in New England for all those years that is enjoying an unprecedented run of success, because you want to be able to document for years to come, for generations to come, this kind of unique time in Bengal history.
Absolutely,
yeah,
man.
You're right. We're entering a golden age of Bengal football, and it's exciting. And I think it's going to happen. We're going to get that trophy. I think it's coming. And
one
officially,
day,
this is officially the longest Bengal Pulse episode ever. Thank you.
Listen, one day, Trags, one day when you retire, you're going to be able to say that you covered the two greatest NFL quarterbacks of all time. You're going to be able to say that, Trags. I'm telling you, you're going to be able to say that.
That would be, as they say, Coach, a nice feather in the cap.
And I like it. A nice feather in the cap. Trags, thank you once again, man. We really appreciate it. You were awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Guys, thank you. We'll do it again soon.
We'll talk soon. Thanks, Trags.
How great was that? Are you kidding me?
He is incredible.
That was unbelievable. That was unbelievable.
That was so awesome, man. And again, I know it's the longest Bengal Pulse. It's one of the best shows.
Jake, I'm worried the power is going to go out of my house. It is raining so hard here. My dog is crying.
No way. Listen, no way. Trags was not going to let that happen. He was dialed in. Listen, man. Listen, real quick before we got out of here. Hey, 11 in a row, man. 11 in a row. The best winning streak in 66 years. The Bengals 10 in a row. Now the Reds 11 in a row. Man, it's the age of the natty, baby. The age of the natty. It's coming. I'm telling you.
Listen, it's so much fun to watch. And listen, I broke down and I bought the Major League Soccer package on Apple so I could watch FC Cincinnati. What a time to be a Cincinnati sports fan, even in Florida. I'm telling you, it's a lot of fun. Go Reds, go FC Cincinnati, and go Cincinnati Bengals. Listen, Trags, it's probably one of our best shows, if not our best show ever. I'm so excited. I can't wait to upload it.
Trags was incredible. I cannot wait to get him back on the show. Just a wealth of knowledge and so dialed into the Bengals. All right, guys, that is another edition of the Bengals Pulse, a special edition of the Bengals Pulse. As always, guys, if you like this podcast, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Make sure you check us out on all of the podcast platforms, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. Make sure you follow him, Mon, at The Fire Mon. Make sure you follow me, at Coach Jake Owens 9. Make sure you follow the Bengals Pulse on Twitter, at Bengals_Pulse 9. And on Instagram, the same, without the at. Bengals_Pulse 9. Mon, this is a great show, man. As always, guys, check out all the awesome podcasts right here on the Wincinnati Podcast Network. Give Mon and I that 5-star review. We very much appreciate it. Mon, I love the Wyatt Earp mustache. That's the only question I didn't get to ask Trags. Who wore it better, Mon or Wyatt Earp? Listeners, comment. Let us know who wore the mustache better, Wyatt Earp or Mon Abelhassan.
1 second. Listen, all of our listeners and followers, please send us some questions about the upcoming Bengal season, players. We would love to have a segment where we answer all of the questions. Post them on our Instagram, post them on our YouTube channel page. We'd love to get to them and answer some of those questions. Please do that.
Absolutely. Well, he is Mon Wyatt Earp Abelhassan. I am Jake. This is the Bengals Pulse. Hoo day, Bengal fans. We will see you next week.
See ya.